Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled to have you all here with us today as we dive into how you can take your defense strategy to the next level. I'm Danielle Lewan, and I'll be your host. Today, we have two incredible experts joining us, Emmanuel Salmona, co-founder and CEO at Nagomi Security, and Ross Ristisi, the Senior Director of Product at CrowdStrike. Now, our goal is for you to leave this webinar with a clear strategy on how you can leverage threat intelligence to not only react, but proactively prevent breaches. Before we dive right into this discussion, a quick housekeeping note. We do want to hear from you and any questions throughout. There's a Q&A option at the bottom of the Zoom webinar, so throw those questions in and we'll be sure to get to them here at the end. I know I briefly introduced Emmanuel and Ross, but a little more background so you know where they're bringing their expertise from today. Ross has been at the forefront at CrowdStrike of driving that actionable threat intelligence for organizations worldwide. Many of you know that CrowdStrike has that best of breed threat intelligence alongside Gen AI innovations, and Ross is certainly bringing a lot of knowledge here today to share with all of you again on how to make that actionable. Emmanuel here with us at Nagomi has been leading Nagomi's mission to partner with folks like CrowdStrike and take that threat intelligence to perform it against real world threats. And that's optimizing those security stacks against breaches, which, as we know, are all too often preventable. Guys, we're going to dive right in and start with one of the biggest headaches that we know all of you are feeling today, and that's the struggle to convert that threat intelligence into actionable steps. Emmanuel, I'd love for you to start by walking everyone through this evolving landscape of threat intelligence, but also why it's become such a crucial part of modern defense strategies.
Thank you, Danielle. Very excited for this webinar and this discussion with Ross and CrowdStrike, our partner. And I'll say that one of the things that we've been hearing a lot from customers is that they're trying to shift the way they're managing their programs from being compliance-driven to being more threat-driven and risk-driven. And in order to do that, they need to be very aware and able to operationalize information they're getting from their threat intel team. And to do so, this is actually very challenging because they have so many layers they need to go through in order to be able to make sense of what it means, but also how to operationalize it, given the security tools they already have.
Fantastic. And Ross, CrowdStrike, such a key partner in this effort. How are you envisioning this best of breed threat intelligence and how it actually fits into the vision of actionable defense?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, Intel is one of those things that I think has a lot of baggage as a term, right? Depending on where you grew up, where you're coming from, you either are indoctrinated and love it, or you wonder what its utility is, because at the end of the day, intelligence doesn't actually do anything, which is a weird thing for me to say, right? I'm the Intel guy. But fundamentally, Intel drives better outcomes. It allows people to make decisions that are better and faster. And that's really the value of intelligence. And that's why when you think about what Intel is supposed to do, it's all about who are you serving, what questions are you able to answer, and why do answering those questions actually result in better outcomes. And it's about the application of intelligence, the application of those answers that makes Intel so valuable. And so Intel for Intel's sake often is largely useless. But if you have a well-tailored program that is answering specific questions that enables you to make those decisions quicker, to respond more at adversary speed, suddenly you have a force multiplier that didn't exist before. And that's really where you start seeing real traction with intelligence and the value that it can truly bring to a defensive program.
Oh, couldn't have said it better myself. And what we definitely don't want folks to do leaving this webinar is not have the ability to do anything. As somebody who's a visual learner, I think it would be so purposeful for us here today to kind of show folks what they could experience with the power of this. Emmanuel, I'd love you to walk folks through the platform and what this could look like for them.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. So let us start with a quick demonstration of the product, but actually start with kind of a day in an analyst. And what I'm sharing here is I'm sharing here the Threat Intel platform by CrowdStrike. I'll let Ross explain a bit more about it.
Thanks, Emmanuel. So starting with the day in the life of from an analyst perspective, if you're an Intel analyst, you'll probably come in and start looking at reporting, what's new, what might be impacting my environment, Why should I care about this particular adversary at this particular time? Did they do something new? Were they taken off the board? As in the case with Scattered Spider, there are 4 new indictments that came out a week and a half ago. Those are changes that change materially my threat profile and is something that I need to get in the hands of my defenders so they can make those decisions that we were just talking about. And so the reporting is the first place that I'd start as an intel analyst. But if you switch over to the attack matrix, at the end of the day, this is really the view that most defenders care the most about, right? Intel analysts love their words. They love their glossy PDFs. They love being able to talk about the problem in a very nuanced and actionable way. But when you try to actually change that PDF, that written report, that briefing into something that you can take actionable steps, MITRE ATT&CK is really kind of the Rosetta Stone between those intel analysts that are giving those briefings, writing those reports, talking about what's going on, and the actual defenders who have to make sense of it and deploy to sensors, do security engineering, do security architecture. And so I might start with Scattered Spider because something materially changed. But at the end of the day, this matrix is the thing that I'm going to go take to my defenders and try to figure out how well we're defending against these specific TTPs because they are a high threat vector for us. And that's a very manual process, even today, across a lot of the security stack, which is one of the reasons why we're so excited about this partnership with Nagomi, because they take something that we provide as kind of best of breed. Here's how the adversary is actually operating in environments that you need a defense against, and takes that operational step and removes a lot of that manual burden.
Thank you, Ross. And that's exactly where we actually start our journey. And what we were very proud of is we currently launched our partnership with CrowdStrike about 2 months ago at Falcon. And our mission is to help organization drive for that last mile operationalization of the threat intel. But our aim is to actually do it in a very simple, easy way, also easy to deploy. Now, one of the objectives that we have in our platform is to be able to connect using read-only APIs to the existing security tools that each organization already has. It might be from the endpoint, identity, network access, email, vulnerability scanner, and the list goes on. Ultimately, we're trying to make sure that our entire stack of controls is maximized against the threat profile we're trying to defend against, and we're doing so in a proactive fashion. So exactly like Ross mentioned, one of the things that we're able to do in the platform today is basically take and operationalize the information that we get directly from the Falcon adversary platform in order to understand should we care about this particular adversary. Sometimes it's because they've been active in our vertical or industry. Sometimes it's because it's part of our geolocation, and sometimes it's because it's one of the adversaries that we care about and we've mapped as one of our areas of focus. We then are able to actually contextualize news that have been coming directly from multiple resources around, and also bake in the information of the MITRE ATT&CK view directly from the CrowdStrike Falcon platform. Now, the magic starts not when we actually visualize the MITRE ATT&CK, but when we're actually able to understand and assess how effective are our existing security controls deployed and operationalized in our environment in actuality, not in theory. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand what have the attackers been doing based on the MITRE ATT&CK, what are the top susceptible techniques, and obviously, what are the known exploitable vulnerabilities that we've seen that have been used under that particular adversary group activity. Now, the way that we actually do it is because we connect to each and every one of those existing security tools, we're able to dissect the way that they're currently deployed across those configurations, those policies, and even the coverage of those particular capabilities, and understand how effective are each and every one of those sub-capabilities are deployed and operationalized in our organization, and what are the ones that are actually needed to be deployed in order to be effective against that particular adversary activity. Now, we don't stop there. Ultimately, what we want to do is not only assess how effective we are, but we also want to provide prescriptive remediation actions on what we can be doing in order to become more proactive and close our defenses against the adversary before they try to take action on our environment. And we go very much into the detail. We're able to provide this prescriptive remediation across all of the tools that are plugged into the system. So this is not just the endpoint or the identity, but across the entirety of the stack of controls. Understand per each and every one of those, what is the remediation actions? What are the policies that need to be remediated? What are the assets that should be actually in scope? And more about this particular policy and why is this relevant to us? All of this is basically the work that a lot of security analysts or threat intel analysts have been doing manually for a while. And this has been sometimes weeks of work in order to operationalize the best of breed information that is very important for our security program, but to make it and to put it into action and to get better returns of that investment that we already made. Now, I will take another 2 minutes just to show you a little bit around the platform and to provide you an overview. However, before I do so, I'll just say that one of the things that we've been working on also with CrowdStrike, but with our partners, is the ability to actually bring out all of this threat readiness capability and customize it and actually bring it into one single report that allows us to actually understand, given a particular adversary group, what is our current resilience against it. And that's basically an extract of the entire platform. It shows us what are the tools that we have deployed, how effective are they currently deployed in our organization and in our environment, what do we know about that adversary group, top susceptible techniques, what have they been using according to the MITRE ATT&CK, and also what do we need to be doing against any particular control we need to make more resilient, and what is that defensive plan that we need to pick to focus on. I will conclude the demo and I'll just say that overall we focus on 4 main areas. The first one is making sure we have the coverage of all of those tools plugged into our environment across the multitude of all those tools. A lot of the times, one of the problems that we find that causes those preventable breaches is we're missing the coverage of the agent on the device or any capability on an identity, etc. The second part is underlying and understanding what attackers are actually doing across a multitude of techniques that they're using, but also across those layered defense that we're already put in place. What we're able to provide our customers is actually be able to understand all of the layered defense that we have and all the compensation that we have between them. For example, as we're trying to defend against phishing, we're able to understand what are all the capabilities that we have across from the endpoint, the email protection, awareness training, identity, etc., in order to provide us the resilience that we need against this particular technique that is being used against by one of our adversary groups. And the last part is the ability to, as showed before, to provide prescriptive remediation action of how to become more resilient against our particular threat profile.
Now, what Emmanuel just shared with us, and I'm getting some reactions here in the chat, is again, operationalizing that last mile, piece of the mile, which for many of you has been manual, time consuming, and maybe even seemed impossible. Ross, you refer to this as closing the loop. And what I love about that is it's not simply crossing the finish line at the mile, grabbing your trophy and you're done. This is a continuous process. Can you double down on the closing the loop piece here and where this fits with CrowdStrike and Nagomi comprehensively?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's absolutely, unfortunately, a treadmill, not a marathon. The adversary is constantly changing, and they're often changing to the defensive posture improvements that we're making as a defensive community. We're not playing, a zero-sum game where you come to the pitch, fight one battle, and then everybody retires to their sides. The adversary learns every time they interact with any security program. And so while you might be able to get through an entire adversary or review your entire security posture this quarter, it's going to be out of date by next quarter because the adversaries changed. There's new tactics, there's new techniques, there's new malware, and frankly, there are new people on the board as well. If you're looking at the full gamut of kind of the adversary space out there, yes, there are some very consistent threats, your nation state level ones that are always going to exist. The people might change out, but the way they operate, the methods are all the same. Then you have cybercrime. And that is very much a wild west of do what works, do what gets quick wins, and cash out when you feel like you're rich enough. and rinse and repeat that cycle with new capabilities, new people. And so security, unfortunately, is a continuous cycle of improvement. And that's why you need both the automation aspect that Nagomi brings to be able to stay on top of that change management as much as possible and understand when your program is drifting away from good health and good standardization, as well as that intel aspect. Because if you don't stay abreast of those adversary changes, if you don't understand how the state of play is changing, even if you're best of breed from a defensive standpoint last week, you might be wildly out of compliance today. And that's simply because not something you did, but the adversary changed. And that's why this is a closing the loop, a continuous cycle of improvement. I wish it was something that we could cross the finish line and take a victory lap with, but I guess it's job security as well.
It is. And, it's not just that one point in time trophy, but we have seen some folks take victory laps and they're continuing to take them. Emmanuel, you were just sharing some incredible success stories with me recently. Would you be able to share just one of those today for everybody?
Sounds good. So for sure, and I'll just add to what Ross said. I'll say that not only the threat lens changes so much, but also security tools change a lot. There's a lot of new features and functionalities that help us as defenders to promote and to be better defended. And also our attack surface, our business changes over time, which means that we need to stay ahead of it. So those are all three main areas of change. And back to your point, Danielle, definitely, we were working with one of the with a very well-known law firm in the UK a while back. And one of the things that happened is the CEO read in the news that another law firm in the UK got breached by a very well-known adversary group. The first question, which is basically that nightmare, the CISO gets the phone call from the CEO and they ask, are we protected? Is it relevant to us? Do we need to take any action? I know we've invested and we have the best of breed solutions. What do we need to do? Now, as you know, those are usually very small security teams. Those teams probably have threat intel, but they don't have threat intel analysts. It's very hard for them to understand what does it mean for them, how are they exposed. It's hard for them. It was hard for them even to understand which defensive capabilities do they need in order to be effective against that particular adversary group. And let alone, it was really hard for them to actually answer the question of, well, given the way the tools are currently operationalized in my environment, where's my gaps? Do I need to take any action? And so what we're able to do with that particular customer is actually provide two layers. The first one is to provide that answer to the CEO. A lot of the times we need to be able to provide that confidence of how well are we protected against any particular adversary group, and where do we have gaps, and what are we going to do about it? So they were able to do that instead of taking sometimes weeks of doing it. They were able to do it within hours, which was very unique, and that gave a lot of confidence to their management team. The second thing, which was very important, is they were able to identify very clear gaps and exposures within their environment that they were able to actually close in a very effective fashion. Most of them actually happened to be from the CrowdStrike EDR platform, but also other tools, in order to become as effective as they can given that particular scenario. So now what happened is the CISO was able to provide clear, concise answers to the management team, and was also able to be very prescriptive and actionable in terms of how they went in and closed their defenses. And that was one of our success stories that we're able to share. And that's also a very small organization, a very small security team, but had the same problem like basically everyone has.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trend. And again, as we started by saying that this is a headache that everybody is feeling. And I think an alleviation of that headache has been this concept of automation. I think automation can be a double-edged sword. And we have folks asking us of where's the balance of automation and then also human oversight. Ross, I know you're passionate about this, and where is the balance there, especially when responding to a threat and managing threat intelligence?
So I think I'm a strong believer in human in the loop in general. Automation is a valuable force multiplier, but at the end of the day, I'm a strong believer in people making the decisions. Once you remove the human out of that element, you tend to get some very interesting outcomes, shall we say. And so this goes back to, intelligence being a supporter of outcomes. And automation being that force multiplier of, as one human with a Nagomi platform, I can manage my entire tech stack now. And something that used to take, 5, 10 people to do it on a weekly cadence, it's now down to one person who is making that intelligence decision. Because at the end of the day, you can't actually have this fully automated because there are reasons why you accept risk from a security perspective. And you might not actually want to apply a policy that would give you 100% protection against scattered spider, because in doing so, maybe now a business unit can't operate the way that they used to be doing. That's something that a product can't automate away for you without a bunch of exceptions, and maintaining the exception list becomes harder than actually maintaining your security at that point. And so that's why I'm a strong believer of getting the people as informed as they possibly can, and then enabling them to automate to force multiply as much as possible so you can make your security team as efficient, because we all know there's a labor and skill shortage gap across security. And what we should be trying to do from a product perspective, both from the CrowdStrike side as well as Nagomi, is making those people as efficient as possible to create as strong of a security program as possible. And that's where I think this kind of partnership really shines, in the fact that we've now supercharged one analyst to do something that used to take a team. And the more we push on that frontier, the better off we're going to make organizations overall.
Yeah, I mean, talk about an efficiency success story of having you be able to manage an entire program. I don't know anything better than that. I do want to lean in on that as we continue to have examples of folks like yourself, Ross, that are still trying to separate signal from noise. So, Emmanuel, when we hop back to the side of the Nagomi platform, how do we manage alert fatigue when somebody like Ross is on the other end and is now managing potentially an entire program on their own?
So great question. I think the first thing is what we're hearing from organizations is that they're moving away from just being the reactive side, which is detection and response, which is an area that we've been investing for years now. We have so many tools, logs, events, alerts, and also a lot of alert fatigue. And the question now is, how can we become more proactive and prevent as much as we can left of breach, left of boom, wherever possible? So that's the trend we're seeing today, the proactive security trend. Now, if you think about it, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to help organizations think about security in a different way. Instead of thinking about it as mean time to detect something, perhaps we can start thinking about mean time to prevent something. And in order to do so, we need to be able to understand really well what the adversaries are doing right now, based on the best of breed solution of threat intel that CrowdStrike is providing, then understand what are the controls that are needed, how well are they deployed, is it relevant for me, what do I need to do, and even automating and closing that gap in the last mile in the shortest amount of time before an adversary is able to take any action. And this is kind of, I think, where we want to get to today in the industry.
Mm-hmm. The last topic I really want us to hone in on before we open the floor to some of these questions that have come in is this concept of communication. So here you have some of the most powerful threat intelligence in the world, and a platform that's actually turning that into something that we can understand. But as we bring the human element back in here, folks still have to communicate that success, that progress within the organization. Ross, Emmanuel, I want y'all both to touch on this, but what is your advice for folks today on actually being able to translate technical threats into understandable business risks that will move the needle? Ross, let's start with you.
I think you just hit on probably the single hardest question in cybersecurity. The technical defenses are far easier than trying to justify ROI. There have been a lot of metrics that people have thrown up. Mean time to detection, as we talked about before, is one of those metrics that people talked about. Amount of alerts closed. There's a lot of proxies for how effective am I at defending? What is the business value I'm getting out of putting the money that I am in security rather than putting it into, sales enablement if I'm a CEO? This is an age-old problem, and I think fundamentally the way we get over that hump is we need to start talking the language of the rest of the C-suite. At the end of the day, security enables business outcomes by preventing loss, preventing downtime, enabling operations in different markets that you might have too much risk otherwise. It's about enabling the company to take actions that it otherwise would be limited in. And that's really what we need to be talking about from a cybersecurity perspective. And I know it's like talking to a foreign language for a lot of those of us who grew up in cybersecurity, but that translation of event stopped, preventions put in place to what does that enable the sales organization to go do, the product organization to go do. Now you're talking the language of the rest of the C-suite and they can get behind and support you. That's not an easy task, and I've yet to see a dashboard that does it well. But ultimately, I think that is the goal that we're all trying to push for is how do we show that we're saving the business money through this investment? How are we a force multiplier for the business to go do its primary thing, which is generally to make money? And I think, going back to the partnership that we're building, by having that marriage between the adversary activity and proactive prevention, you're not talking about how did we stop something on our network. We're talking about how did we save you money from a loss and prevention standpoint because we've already stopped it at the perimeter. We've already prevented activity. And that translates into dollars and cents that can be reinvested in other parts of the organization that, frankly, the CEO generally cares more about.
Emmanuel, I know the concept of ROI and certainly communicating it is near and dear to your heart. Let's hear from you.
Definitely. I'll say that this is basically a problem everyone has. We've spoken with, I want to say, hundreds of security leaders. And the way that we've been tackling it as an industry, we've been looking into usually manual assessments. Perhaps we've been doing outside-in assessment of any sort. We've been having risk-based assessment, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a lot of investment going in that area. And ultimately, what we hear sometimes is, like Ross, like what you mentioned, is we get to those metrics. Those are usually very siloed vertical metrics. They don't tell us actually what's the risk. They don't tell us what's our exposure. And they also don't tell us what exactly we need to do with it. And I think that if we think about it, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to take and understand what are we trying to defend against? Is it ransomware? Is it phishing? Is it particular adversary activity like we discussed before with Scattered Spider? And then we want to answer the question of how protected are we? How effective is our current stack of controls, the way it's currently deployed? And where do we still have gaps? And what are we doing against it, or what are we doing in order to move the needle? And what we hear a lot again and again from a lot of security practitioners we've been working with is that they're trying to use the same set of telemetry that same threat intel analyst is using, the defenders are using, but actually translate that English to English in many words, so that a security or let's say an executive like the CEO or the board is able to understand how are we protected, what do we need to do about it, and actually also rationalize any particular spend and investments going forward. And that's kind of something that we're able to bake in together, and it's a big advantage that we're seeing that is, addressing a lot of the customer needs today.
Well said. We're now going to transition into some Q&A, some questions from the audience. And if you haven't had the chance to submit those, please do so now. I'm going to set the stage a little bit for these first few questions because it appears that we have multiple CISOs on the line. And I just want to recognize, Emmanuel, we get asked all the time, especially coming out of Stealth earlier this year, of who is Nagomi's superhero. And we tell everyone that the superhero is a CISO. You don't need to be able to fly, to stretch your arms 100 miles, be invisible. The true superheroes out there are the ones that are going home to their families every day, that have a normal life, but are also showing up and defending their organizations in order to keep them safe. The question that we have first here is, where is the role of the CISO going, and the expectation of shifting them to be proactive? For years, they've been on the reactive side and they've had to adapt to that. But how are folks like CrowdStrike and Nagomi and companies like ours and platforms like ours enabling them to continue to be superheroes? Ross, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, CISO has one of the hardest jobs, I think, in the corporate environment. They lead a loss center. They generally don't get any attention until something goes wrong. And then when something goes wrong, the question is always, well, why didn't you protect us better? And so I think, the more we can shift to proactive, the more that we can create a comprehensive risk-based security program and support them in conveying that message, the more you change that paradigm. Because at the end of the day, CISO has a very hard job, but there's a lot of tools at their disposal. And I think, from a product perspective, from an industry perspective, we really need to be laser focused on how do we get past the assumed breach model that I think we all operate under and actually help them defend in ways that help them realize those gains. Prevention is a great topic area to talk about. Intelligence driving the right choices, the smart security architecture decisions. I think, it's a topic near and dear to me that I'm always going to stump for. But fundamentally, as you talk about the evolution of the CISO role, it has to be one that understands business risk and makes smart decisions about how you protect those areas that are most near and dear to each company. And it's going to be different per organization. And you need to have a layered defense that starts with prevention and then understands what territory you can sacrifice. And that piece is another thing that I think is often underrepresented in these discussions. At the end of the day, not all computer assets are equally valuable. Not all servers are equally valuable. And having a risk-based approach and one that is focused on proactive and preventative defense changes the paradigm and enables the CISO's role to branch out beyond kind of the person who gets beat when something goes wrong to somebody who is seen as a peer at the table and focused on actually enabling the company to do the right thing.
Emmanuel, where have you seen this play out successfully and again, really advocating for CISOs in this journey?
So I think like Ross, like you said, I think that being a CISO is one of the hardest jobs. It's a simple question is even knowing if as a CISO, am I doing a good job is really hard. How can I show my boss that I'm doing a good job? I actually asked a question, a CISO, about a month ago, and we asked them and they said, well, listen, if there's no breaches, we're doing a good job. Well, really, is that the best way of looking at it? Aren't there better ways? And to be realistic, we've been talking as an industry about CISOs becoming more, or security being more of a business enabler, and the CISO being, an integral part of it and becoming business leaders. But have we given them the tools to actually do it? Have we given them the ability to understand, measure their effectiveness, understand their gaps, be able to become more risk-based? Well, that's been a gap because we've been thinking about it very much still according to forms or subjective ways of measurement, which is really hard, or very siloed approach, right? Because ultimately we have so many security tools and it's really hard to make sure and understand ultimately what's that cohesive picture. So we're seeing the transition right now and becoming more proactive. One of those things that is very important for being proactive is the ability to measure and the ability to assess how well are we doing and what next we need to be doing next. So I think there is a big opportunity in that.
Yeah. Ross, I'm going to point this next question directly to you, just as the theme around threat intelligence, but we're now taking this up a level into the boardroom. How do you see the role of threat intelligence evolving in the boardroom, but more specifically ensuring that they perceive it as valuable?
I think, again, that's a great question. And it's about how do you formulate intelligence? Intelligence, as I said at the top, is all about informing outcome. Informing outcome assumes that the producer of the intelligence actually understands the questions that are being debated. Because how can you have influence on a decision if you don't know what the decision is? And so when you're talking about up-leveling intelligence to being, for the C-suite or the board, you really need to take the intel analyst out of what is often a tactical role where they're supporting the SOC and give them the space and the understanding of what's being discussed. Why are they producing the document? Why are they producing the brief? So that way they can actually give the right information and the right knowledge to the people who are making those decisions. And so now you're moving from kind of that tactical feed the SOC type role to something that is more strategic. And those pieces actually take longer to build. They tend to be more comprehensive. And being a little biased, because I used to be a strategic analyst, they're a whole lot harder to write because at the end of the day, the assumption is when you're presenting to a board, get maybe 3 sentences where they actually care, and then they're moved on to the conversation or something else. And so you have to be really tight in your assessment and give them the most actionable piece up front. We often call it the bottom line up front. And that's really where intelligence needs to go. And that's really kind of I'd say, the problem for a lot of these teams that are inside companies is they're serving so many different masters, they're wearing so many different hats. Targeted production gets really difficult, and they tend to do one size fits all, which ends up kind of being in this Goldilocks area where it doesn't really help the tactical analyst because it has too much other stuff in it. And it doesn't really help the strategic decision makers because it's got too many details in it. And so when you talk about intelligence and helping the board, specificity, training, and actual dedication are kind of the 3 things that I'd point to. Is you need your intel program to understand those and know what's being discussed in that meeting room before the assignment comes down. Otherwise, you're going to miss 100% of the time.
Yeah, I think that leans back into the concept of being proactive. Only on this level, it's with education. The last question is actually for you, Emmanuel. It's going to require a little heavy lifting of bringing back up the Nagomi platform. But the CISO wants to dive into the threats in the news feature and have another brief overview on how that feature works, especially if they get an alert from CrowdStrike. And is this essentially supposed to replace any news feeds that they're supposed to be monitoring, and kind of bringing that into the Nagomi platform? Do you mind pulling that back up?
Sure. Yes, definitely. So ultimately what we do is we're not exchanging the alerts that they might be getting from in their SOC or through their CM. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're able to help the organization understand what's relevant for them, operationalize the information they're getting from their chosen threat intel. In this case, it's a CrowdStrike threat intel. Help them prioritize what they can do with it, and close a lot of the manual work that has been done in the past by the threat intel analyst or by the defenders in order to understand what are the techniques, how effective is their current defenses against those techniques, what is the state of their current controls, and given that they find exposures, what can they be doing in order to take action and to be more proactive and defend against those before an adversary takes action. So we're closing all of that loop in a very, very quick approach that allows those users to actually do it in hours versus weeks.
Fantastic. All right, as we wrap up here, I primarily just want to thank all of you that have joined us here today. We know it's a busy time of year, but we certainly know, again, on the theme of being proactive, we're every single day waking up and trying to be on the forefront of cyber. Ross, thank you so much. CrowdStrike as a partner, we really appreciate all of the hard work that y'all are doing in the space and also partnering with us to operationalize this last mile. And Emmanuel, again, for remaining mission critical as we focus on this each and every day. For all of you, if you have any additional questions, both Ross and Emmanuel are available for follow-up meetings. You can head to both of our websites. And again, this webinar will be on demand. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank
you so much.